This is Block 9, The Liberal Establishment, Section 2, Camelot, with the section beginning the Moon Mission. Space was a national obsession in the 1950s throughout the 1960s. That the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was just kicking into the highest of gears when Kennedy became president. And Kennedy knew his nation well enough to challenge the United States into something he knew or he felt that the United States could do. So early in his term, Kennedy challenged the American people, thousands of engineers, scientists, to overtake the Soviet Union in terms of space operation. He said that by the time the decade is out, by the time the 1960s were over, that the United States should be able to put a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth. And that was Kennedy's challenge, offered up in 1961, that by the time 9 years was over, by the time 1970 arrived, that a man should walk on the moon. That inspired American science and engineering to make that dream a reality, and then the Soviets, not wanting to lose face, desperately had to keep up in what became popularly known as the space race. There were 3 programs that brought the United States from the Earth to the Moon, and they were called Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And they were the names given to the manned space programs in the 1960s. Here's some pictures from Project Mercury. This is the Mercury missions. And watch as we kind of flip through these, how the rockets get bigger, the capsules get bigger, and the spacesuits kind of get a little more complex. The first series of missions were known as the Mercury Project, and the astronauts, these 7 men, they went up in single-person capsules. Only one person could fit in them. They were the heroes of the United States, that their pictures and likenesses were on the news and magazines and lunchboxes, on doing advertisements. They were, you know, the people that every American boy wanted to be. What do you want to be, you know, kid? Oh, I want to be an astronaut. That was something that was a cultural phenomenon of the 1960s. When the Mercury missions, the point of those were to kind of see how people reacted to living in space, what spacecraft could do, what systems needed to be fixed, changed, improved, etc., etc. After we kind of found out all we could from Mercury, we moved on to what was known as the Gemini missions. You can see the rocket is bigger, the capsule is larger, and now we're putting 2 people in space. These missions continued learning things that, you know, we needed to solve the technical problems of getting to the moon. Finally, Gemini was done, and the final program, which became known as the Apollo program, was put in motion. Apollo 1 was a catastrophic setback, and these 3 astronauts here were killed on the launch pad, and you can see the burned up capsule right here. There was a spark, and the spark caught the capsule on fire, and sitting on the launch pad, they could not open the door from the inside. By the time technicians got up to open the door from the outside, these 3 astronauts had perished. There was national mourning. You know, they were given full state funerals. The American people mourned for these 3 men. But after, you know, several months, about 8 months I think, of trying to figure out what exactly had gone wrong and fixes that could be made to improve it, the Apollo program got back off its feet. You can see it's the rocket that launched the Apollo craft into space is the largest rocket ever built by man. That's the Saturn V rocket. It's enormous. You can see the size of the capsule has gotten bigger and bigger. 3 people now, and in the summer of 1969, 5.5 years, almost 6 years after Kennedy himself had been killed, on July the 16th, Apollo 11, the Apollo 11 mission, the 11th mission, lifted off. Aboard were astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, and there's Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. We're going to be the first people to ever set foot on the moon. 5 days later, the lunar lander, which you can see back here, detached from the spacecraft, rocketed itself down to the moon, and a few hours later, Neil Armstrong became the first human being to ever set foot on a world other than the Earth. And he said his famous line, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The landing was an awesome success for the United States. It was a propaganda victory, it was a scientific victory, it was a Cold War victory, it was a moral victory, a cultural victory. 5 more Apollo missions would follow, or 5 more successful Apollo missions would follow. If you ever want to see a darn good movie, go see Apollo 13, which was the unsuccessful mission. Nobody died, but it was a very, very, very close-run thing. In total, 12 Americans between 1969 and 1972 set foot on the moon. But after Apollo 17, the program was canceled. We didn't quite know what to do next. There was talk about building moon bases and Mars bases, but since 1972, no human being has ever set foot on another world. They are the only men, the Soviets never got there, to walk around on an alien world. It was one of the liberal establishment's most successful, glorious things. The space program and the moon landing was something that all Americans then and all Americans now have the ability to feel proud of. It was a combined effort of scientists, engineers, designers, technicians, and these incredibly brave men who strapped enormous rockets to their back and allowed themselves to be shot up into space.